Dr. Katindi about 15 years ago. At the time, she was working at the Institute for Economic Affairs. And Dr. Katindi is among Africa's top 6 female futurists. She will explain to us what a futurist is. She is the founder of Kenya's premier strategic foresight organizations, Longview Consult and Longview Futures Foundation, which facilitate futures research, policy analysis, foresight strategies, and trainings. She is also the principal trainer at the Africa Foresight Lab, set up to foster foresight literacy among young people in Africa. She has successfully integrated foresight methodologies to facilitate policy debates and future strategies, including working with the government of Kenya's Vision 2030. Her work so far includes published books and book chapters in the areas of governance and elections, socioeconomic inequalities, citizen civic engagement, civil society organizations, youth demographics, youth employment, women and gender budgeting, health, extractive industry, humanitarian aid and livelihoods, all in Kenya and the African context. So she's quite well suited to talk to us about the state of Kenya's economy today. And I welcome you, Katindi. Katindi is also born again and loves the Lord. Welcome, Katindi.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Loud and clear.
All right, thank you, thank you.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, it is. I'm really privileged to be in this meeting today, and I thank the Hesabika team for considering my participation worthy this morning. So I thank you very much. Allow me to share my screen so that we get into the presentation. I was asked to present on the state of Kenya's economy and the state of Kenya's economy and issues around inequality, which I have researched about in my work. But just before that, I think, as Rachel mentioned, I run 2 organizations which I founded, that is Longview Consult and the foundation, and we basically do research and policy analysis. She did say that I should maybe tell you a little bit about futures, and futures is really thinking about the future. That's why it's called futures. And we basically do that to try and see what strategies we can put in place now to try and make our future much better. And in a sense, try and unpack what we might face if we don't make those strategic decisions at this point in time. I also, of course, you've heard that because of being a researcher, I've been involved in quite a number of researches. I guess for purposes of these conversations and from the introductions, some of these publications might be quite interesting particularly to the interns. And I recommend this particular publication. All of them are online, which actually begins to give youth trends in Africa up to 2060. There's a Kenyan version which looks at trends in Kenya. It's called the Youth Fact Book. It's also online. And this publication we did in 2010 when we were asking ourselves, what might the future of Kenya look like, looking at the issue of the youth bulge. Other publications around young people include this one that we did in 2019 that was looking at what is the future of Kenya, looking at the issue of reproductive health in Kenya. We were projecting 10 years, and this was in 2019, December. And one of the scenarios we were painting was when you look at reproductive health, 90% of reproductive health, for example, is funded by donors. And we actually were talking about what if a catastrophic event happened and donor resources were diverted. That would mean that there would be a spike, for example, in teenage pregnancies and all that. And barely 2 months we were on lockdown because of COVID. I'm not trying to say that futures is predictions, but I'm just trying to say that looking at foresight is an interesting way of trying to think about the future and, in a sense, making strategic decisions for the present. Let me not go into a video. I was going to show you about the work that I do, but we can talk about that later. Sorry. Let me start with the state of the economy. And I think from Athanga's presentation, I will confirm or rather, I'll say that my presentation is going to confirm the feelings that you have about the state of the economy, that it is depressing, it is bad, it is disappointing, it is unsustainable, it is devastating. And we'll see that from the statistics that we have shortly. Now, starting off, I think we want to look at how is the economy doing, or how has it been doing since, let's say, the 80s. And just, I want somebody to unmute their microphone and just tell me what you're seeing. What do you notice about economic performance in Kenya over the years? Just somebody.
Vincent, it is dependent. It is, we have a 5-year cycle determined by elections.
It is determined by elections. So you can see in 92, in 97, in 2002, the elections, of course, the economy does very badly. And so you can see in 2007, there was much more optimism, of course, based on the elections in 2002. I believe the people on this call may have been born by 2002. So looking at that, you can see that 2007, people were a bit more optimistic, but of course, because of the post-election violence, we went to 0.2%. Now, one of the things you will notice, this is what in futures we call trends monitoring. But you notice that, for example, in 2020, again, and why it is important to keep asking ourselves or questioning some of the trends that we are seeing is to ask ourselves, what if something else happened? How would the trajectory look like? And in 2020, of course, based on these narratives around Africa rising, which sometimes we don't question, you see that the projections for Kenya were quite high, right? But because of COVID, we sank into 1.7. The projections have been in this year, we're going to grow by 3.2. But again, because of the waves we are seeing, chances are that this may go lower, or by God's grace, it might rise. Now, one of the things or arguments we make about the GDP is that it's not a good indicator of people's welfare. So it's something to take with a pinch of salt, because one of the things that is peddled, for example, by African governments is that if we are growing by a certain number, so you can see in 2010, for example, we are growing by 8.4. But if you took time to look at inflation, for example, you would see that perhaps it was depending. I haven't looked at inflation in 2010, which is the cost of living. You may find that it was high, and you may find that poor people were actually struggling. So what we are saying is that, yes, GDP is a good indicator of how the economy is an indicator of how the economy is doing, but not necessarily the best indicator, because it doesn't tell you how people are faring, okay? Now let's move on to another indicator, which is the cost of living. And I want us to look at food prices and fuel prices, right? So what I did is look at in 2019, the first quarter, and 2020, that is last year, the first quarter. I don't know what you notice in this quadrant here. What does someone notice? Anybody? Anyone?
Yes, quite a high rise from 1.78 in 2019, for instance, to 8.9.
Yes, and you can see in February, by the time we were going into lockdown, the cost of living was incredibly high. You can see that, right? And so this can begin to tell you, if we are on a lockdown, the kind of, prices we are going to be experiencing, particularly when it comes to food. Think about at this point whether it's climatic also conditions that also affect. By the time we were going into lockdown, remember last year, there was the issue of a slight drought, but also the issue of locust infestations. So what we are saying is that this is can be an indicator of some of the things to expect. Usually at a point like now, particularly because of the lockdown, there's, of course, food becomes quite expensive and so forth. Now, in terms of what do you see with fuel prices? You notice that in 2019, things were a bit expensive, but in 2020, they slowed down. And of course, that can be explained by the fact that movement was curtailed. And so not many people were using fuel. So cost of food went up 2 to 12 times in Q1 of 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. Again, you've noticed that the effects of 2020, we are not yet out of the woods because the effects of 2020 are yet to be felt fully, at least by 2022. And globally, they say that there's an imminent recession that is coming. When you think about, of course, COVID in 2020, you realize that the statistics in KNBS were saying that up to 75, or rather unemployment went up by 75%. So you can imagine, of course, that means that does contribute to the issues of cost of living, but also people's vulnerability in the country. Now, I want us to look at also, and this is where inequality comes into play. If I don't know if anyone can just quickly say what they see in these numbers. So this is Nairobi, and this is inflation, overall inflation. This is in 2020. This is Nairobi's upper income group. This is Nairobi's middle income group, and this is Nairobi's lower income group. So this is cost of living by different classes of people. I want somebody to just tell me what they see quickly at a glance.
I think I would say that that the cost of living for upper upper income people has actually reduced from January to December compared with the lower income and middle income people.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. You can see that in January, while they were on lockdown, their cost of living reduced, isn't it? But for poor people, it looks like it really went up and stayed up for a while. What else do you notice?
Lower income earners across the board compared to upper income earners.
Sorry?
For lower income earners compared to the people in the upper income bracket.
Okay, what about the lower income earners compared to the upper income? Vincent?
Yes.
What are you saying about the people in the lower income compared to the upper income?
Their costs are higher. Whatever the inflation is higher compared to people in the upper income across the board.
Yes, that people in the lower income actually do pay 2 to 3 times more for their cost of living is high by 2 to 3 times. Okay, so they're already vulnerable, but you can tell that when you look at their difference between them and these ones, you can see that their cost of living in different months was quite high. Okay. Now, so basically what we are trying to say is that conditions within the economy affect different classes and groups of people differently. And I think that's an important discussion when you're talking about inequality, because sometimes when we put blanket policies or we look at an economy, we start saying Kenya is doing well or young people are included. But are we asking ourselves, what is the experience of the different groups of people that we see? Now, to other economic indicators, you can see that, for example, the interest rates have been rising. You can see, for example, that private consumption has reduced quite highly. And that means when there's no consumption, it means money is not circulating as much within the economy. And so it means that, of course, the economy will not do as well, right? Then you can see government consumption has also reduced, and government is among the highest spenders in any economy. You can see private investment has reduced drastically, okay? You can see government investments has also reduced. You can see export of goods and services has reduced drastically, and you can see import of goods and services has reduced drastically. So this has implications on employment, it has implications of money circulation in the economy, and so forth, right? And you can see that it didn't start in 2020, after COVID was announced. You can see that quite a bit of it started a little earlier on. Okay, like government spending, yes, we are spending on very big infrastructure projects, but you can see that that has been reducing over time, okay? You can also see that, of course, 2020, because of the circumstances, the spikes were much higher. Now, let's look at, these are things we already know, we've seen them in the newspapers. But lest we forget, I think, we try to see these things, but somehow we bury our heads in the sands and we want to imagine that they're not happening. One of the things we know is that we are incredibly in debt. Yes, I've been in forums where a lot of people say, oh, you know, this is an exaggeration, that Kenya is not in debt, we are within the threshold, and that's an argument that the government has been using. But we are now beginning to go to the orange because we are beginning to go past 60% to GDP of debt, okay? You already know, you've seen the hashtags on Twitter and so forth about IMF don't lend Kenya and so forth. You can see, this was in the newspapers, I saw it online, but just in case you didn't see it, you can see that our levels of debt have increased incredibly. And someone went ahead to even say that in 2020, we borrowed 3.37 billion daily. The president was on record saying that we lose 2 billion daily to corruption. And that is devastating, because if we are borrowing and then, you know, taking almost half of that money, that's something quite, I don't even have a word for it. You can see, again, we are proposing some of these things like BBI that are going to cost us 3.61 billion annually. This is corruption. You can see it's not just at the national level that we are in debt. We can see that Kenyans Fuliza are about 1.2 billion daily, you know. And then, basically we are saying that apart from the government, because I mean, that's in the national limelight, that the government is not living within its means. We are also, or our young people, or many Kenyans are living beyond their means. And of course, we are saying that the country is very corrupt. Now, let's transition into inequality. And I'm really glad about the Mentimeter exercise we did, because it begins to answer, at least to elaborate a lot of the questions that we're doing. I put this picture here because while I worked at Society for International Development, we developed together with KNBS a publication that was looking at Kenya's inequality on different issues, whether it's access to services, but that information was to the ward level. These publications are online and you can actually get the county versions. And I'm grateful that this work actually kickstarted the first CIDPs, or was the basis for planning the first CIDPs in around 2012. So there are county versions, there's the abridged version, but there's also a national version that gives you data to the ward level of different counties. But it begins to unmask a lot of the inequalities we see in this country. A lot of the information that is in this presentation concerning the inequality is stuff you know, or you have seen, but you probably just don't have the exact numbers. But so my work is really to just confirm to you how bad it is or what the numbers are. But let's start with definitions or some of the arguments that are given about inequality. Now, I don't know, somebody just tell me, I'm a teacher by heart, so I want somebody to tell me what you see in these two pictures. Anybody?
On the left, they are, go ahead, whoever is speaking, Kahutu.
Yes, good morning, Daktari.
Good morning.
I'm allowed to say that the first picture,
yeah,
I think describes the status of Kenyan economy.
Okay, in what sense?
In this sense, that the rich getting richer and richer, they have a better chance of access to good education, healthcare.
Okay.
And the last picture describes the status of economy in so many developed countries. Then, whether you're poor or not poor, you have access to quality education, quality healthcare, and the like. Yes, thank you.
I've never thought about it that way, but thanks, Kihu, for that. Rachel, you are going to say something.
Okay.
On the left, you have the, go ahead, Simon.
Okay, I'll literally interpret the pictures. On the left, we see where those people are standing is equal. Like none of them has advantage over the other. But the other picture, we see that what they're standing on, it's different according to the need. The shorter has more platform to stand, and the one who is tallest has nowhere to stand because of the need. So it's like, that is equality and equity.
Okay.
That is what I'll...
Okay, thanks, Kahutu. Okay, Rachel?
Just going to say what he said about on the left, some can see and others can't because of their height. Yeah. And on the right, if you want everybody to see, then you need to help the short ones.
Yes. So that is, sorry?
Yeah.
Just on a light note, I'm wondering why they should not be the ones playing in the field in the first place.
I really like that. Yes. That is, I like that, Wilson, because it's true that a lot of times we are spectators to this action, isn't it? And yet inclusion requires that, and one can interpret it differently. You can be part of the game, or you can be playing your part, because again, the game is not, it's like saying everyone has a role to play. So there are those who are in active duty, like our leaders. So you can call them the people in the field, but we as citizens also have a role to play, right? So you can look at them at different, but one can argue, particularly the interns in this room, that rather than being a spectator or a cheerleader, you can also be part of the game. So there are different ways of interpreting that, and I really appreciate the discussion that we are having. Now, yes, it is true that when you look at this, and part of these are particularly when you're a politician, if let's say you are a county governor, the politically correct thing to do is to get resources and then take all your awards and divide the money into equal portions, right? But you rarely look at what are the different circumstances in your area of let's say the area you're leading, because there are some people who need more resources than others to be able to assume the access to opportunity is to see the game. So that this person, giving them the same amount of resources as this other person may not help them, but it is a politically correct thing to do. Whereas in this other one, the short race might need more resources and this one may not, so that at least all of them have an equal opportunity, or the equal outcome here is to be able to see the match. Now, there's a picture I have that I haven't been able to sort of like trace in my laptop, but there's a third picture that actually is asking, why do we have to spend resources always putting this person up? Why don't we remove this barrier so that access at whatever circumstances you have, you can still have access to a much better access to what is going on. So there's the argument about equal resources, equitable resources, and removing barriers. And that is a precursor to the discussion around equity or inequality. There are people who argue that it is not possible to have everyone at the same level, right? Even if you have twins, there are those who are going to be, somehow they will never be exactly the same. And yet the same womb, probably were born 2 seconds or I don't know, however many minutes apart from each other, were raised in the same homestead, perhaps have similar opportunities, but the outcomes will never be exactly the same. So people argue that it's impossible for equity to be achieved. But what we are arguing is that inequalities, yes, they do exist, but and because not everyone is equally able to take advantage of available opportunities. However, the reason why this discussion is so important is because there has to be a fair chance for everybody to be able to get those equal opportunities, so that there's a chance for them to get equitable outcomes. And so it is really not about sameness, it is about fairness, and it is about justice. I hope I have communicated effectively. But let's move on and look at what is the premise for equity or inequality in Kenya. At independence, if you remember your history, for those who are young or those who lived it, the philosophy was, let's deal with disease, ignorance, and poverty. Okay, so they prioritize health, education, and poverty. And that's because of what the circumstances were. But also the economics of the time were what we were calling trickle-down economics. And by that, we are saying that the idea of development was get your low-hanging fruits. So depending on the interpretation, then, for example, invest in high productive areas, and then you, whatever income you get, you can then trickle it down to the places that are low productive. So places like Northern Eastern, for example, were seen as low productivity areas. But again, I say this is depending on how you look at it, because it was seen as the places that are more productive are the places that have, good productive land, cropland, and that rains. And so the arid and semi-arid areas were not looked at as high productivity. Now, if this was a face-to-face, or if we had more time, I would probably ask you, what would be your interpretation of high productivity? I made this presentation once, and the chair of Maendeleo ya Wanawake at the time told me, Katindi, you call us poor, but do you know how many camels I have? So she told me she had about, I think, let's call them 100 camels for purposes of making the math easier. Each camel was about 70,000 shillings. So despite the fact that all the indicators, the national indicators, are showing that she's poor based on the location she comes from, the fact that she has 70 camels, and 100 camels, and each of them is 70,000. How much money does she have? How much money does she have as a person? Forget quality of water, forget the kind of housing she has. How much money is at her disposal just by the number of camels she has?
700,000.
No, 7 million.
7 million, sorry.
Yeah, 7 million. And so she was asking me, so am I poor? Because the people you're calling rich are not necessarily, don't have 7 million in assets. So basically what I'm saying is that this high productivity was the interpretation of the leadership at the time. And so anyway, to cut the long story short, poverty rather than distribution mattered in political and policy discourses. Hence the emphasis was put on economic growth. And then as the country grew richer, this wealth was supposed to trickle down to the poorest sections of society. We all know the politics of our country, ethnic, regional, and so forth. And that did not happen. So historically, we've had areas that have been marginalized for a long time. But we are also saying that this issue about economics is an inadequate way of measuring inequality. And so in recent years, there's been arguments about social dimensions of inequality, such as access to education, clean water, and sanitation, which are indicators of quality of life. And that when you combine the people's economic welfare and these social dimensions, then one is able to tell whether people have equal or fair access or just access to means of livelihoods. And then being then deprived of these essential services deepens poverty and reduces people's well-being. So that the argument here is that you may have education, but if you don't have a job, then again, your well-being is not catered for. Or you may have money, but if you don't have certain, access to certain things, then it becomes not a very good indicator. And so stark differences in accessing these essential services or these disparities makes it very difficult to reduce poverty, even when economies are growing. I'll just give you some numbers based on, again, the research I'm telling you that I was involved in, and just indicators from around the world that show what inequality does. Now, countries that are more unequal experience less poverty reduction for similar levels of economic growth. So what do I mean? A 1% increase in income in the most unequal countries produces a mere 0.6% in reducing poverty. In more equal countries, the same 1% growth reduces poverty by 4.3%. So you can see it is in the interest of a country to address inequality, and that it's not enough that if you want to address poverty, you must address inequality. Now, in a situation of, this is another study again that was done, where 2% growth rate and a poverty rate of 40%, a low inequality country would have this headcount or would have that poverty in 11 years. Under similar circumstances, a high inequality country would take 35 years to have the same levels of poverty. I think by this, I mean that just emphasizing the point that if you do not address inequality, there's no way you're going to effectively address poverty. Now, a second type of relationship with poverty reduction is that inequality and economic growth has to do with the type of growth and how it is distributed. What do we mean by this? Like if just to ask you, what are the sectors in the economy that drive, what are the sectors that drive Kenya's economic growth? Anybody?
Morning again.
Sorry?
Morning. The first is agriculture.
Yes, agriculture.
And there's tourism.
Okay.
And there's also, and also there's this that's coming up, digital economy also.
Digital economy, manufacturing, those are some of the sectors, isn't it? Which one, in your view, will reduce poverty fastest?
Agriculture. Wow.
Agriculture. Why? Why agriculture?
Kilimo ni uti wa mgongo.
Okay. I like that.
I believe it's manufacturing because it will create jobs, and the output is goods that have more value than raw stuff. So it will earn more.
Okay. So
what about sports and creative economy?
What about what?
Sports and creative economy.
Okay, and creative economy. All right. So let me tell you, all the sectors are important, and I'm not trying. Sorry, I can't hear. Is someone talking, or maybe they need to be muted, right? Okay, sorry. So I was saying that all the sectors are important in the economy, okay? But Wilson, please help me mute the mic of the person who's speaking, the background noise.
Done.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that all the economies are important. All the sectors are important, but just to say that some sectors have much more impact in poverty reduction than others, or they are more effective in reducing poverty than others. And agriculture has been tested around the world to be one of the most effective in reducing household poverty or individual poverty faster. And the reason for that is very simple, that when you look at a service economy, or when you look at, for example, somebody said, I think it's Kahuthu who said, the gig economy. How many people have access to, let's say, phones and the internet? They are much less than, for example, when it comes to agriculture, everybody eats at least 3 times a day. And so the food economy, if for example, you're to look at agriculture, it is in every household and in everyone. Everyone has access to, or has to eat, or, has to interact with food at least 3 times a day, right? And so the reason why agriculture is more effective is for that reason, that no one is exempt from food compared to others. So when you think about, let's say, manufacturing or the service economy, yes, they do reduce poverty. The problem, though, is that the access is to fewer people. So, for example, when you think about manufacturing, who can work in manufacturing? It is sometimes people with a certain level of education, and even then it cannot absorb 100% of the population. So basically, agriculture becomes that one area that is a low-hanging fruit to try and, in a sense, increase or reduce inequality. But having said that, remember, I'm not saying that agriculture should be the only driver of the service economy. of the economy. I'm saying that it is an effective way of reducing inequality. Now, in China, in some provinces were looked at, or rather, when they were looking at the different provinces in China, the ones that were able to reduce inequality and poverty fastest were those provinces that were predominantly led by agriculture compared to the ones that were led by the service economy. Now, Persistent inequality between different groups, whether it's ethnic, religious, geographical, can create bonds among those who are disadvantaged and allow them to unite in violent activity. I think we had this in the Mentimeter. And so a reduction in inequality does, in a sense, is important to be able to reduce some of this disgruntlement. These are just cartoons for some of the work that I did with young people. And we did this countrywide conversations about what is the future of Kenya. And I don't know if anyone can give me an interpretation of this, but just for purposes of time, some youth, so this is in Coast Province, they said, we feel angry and agitated. This was in 2010. We feel angry and agitated because of how the central government treats us, because we feel like we are the county that brings in, or we are the region that brings in most resources to the country, based on the issues of the port, based on the railway and so forth. But those resources, kwa hivyo tunalisha ng'ombe na inakamuliwa wapi? Nairobi. I found that a very interesting expression of the anger. And at the time we were doing this, there was a lot of discussion about cessation by these two counties. And I just want to pause here and ask, I don't know if there's anyone from the Northern region on the call, but if there is, please let me know, because I want to ask you and to ask the rest of the team here, how do you know, how do the police in Kenya verify whether you're a Kenyan? I want to show you why this anger manifests so deeply. How does the police in Kenya know that you're Kenyan?
I have worked with them because I'm seeing nobody's coming up. I actually do a lot of work in Northern area because I do policy for livestock.
Okay.
And one of my classmates actually at law school told me that she was told to go and bring her grandmother's birth certificate.
Okay.
And she was asking for an ID.
Yeah, what's the difficulty with that in the Northern region?
I mean, not even Northern, even you, if I asked you to go and bring your grandmother's birth certificate, even if you're not from the North.
Yeah, by the way, my grandma, true, doesn't have a birth certificate. Okay, how else? How else, people?
They usually check for your vaccine, your BCG vaccine on your left arm, hand.
Exactly. What is the trouble with that?
Pastoralists don't get, they're always moving, there are no health facilities nearby, so they're always on the move.
Exactly. And so chances are that, first of all, at the time, for the longest time, they used to use traditional birth attendants, right? So, and when they usually, at this point in time, a lot of them never used to get vaccinated because they are shifting from one place to another. How else? And so they may not have that. And on the basis of that, the fact that they don't have that vaccination, it becomes a very big point of being harassed by the police. How else? What's the other third way? So your grandmother's certificate, your BCG vaccination, what else?
Is it on the mere fact on how they look or how they appear?
Yes. So the police can never tell between the difference between a Kenyan Somali and a Somali. So what they do is try and touch the texture of their hair. Na kama wewe si nywele ngumu, then you constantly have to justify whether you're Kenyan. So you can imagine if you don't have the vaccination, if you don't have your grandmother's certificate, and obviously if your hair is not nywele ngumu, it becomes a basis for discrimination. And so at the point we were doing this work, one young person told us, look at how the future of Kenya will look like. So basically, we are going to secede because you're constantly harassing us, and this is the future of Kenya. The point I'm trying to make is that when you don't address inequalities and when people completely have to always justify their existence, then there's obviously that a lot of disgruntlement. And I think you've seen this also when it comes to Black Lives Matter and so forth. Now, let's look at Kenya's manifestations of inequality. What do you notice based on the things that we have said on this map? So first of all, Kenya is ranked as the 10th most unequal. This is a study that was done by UNDP, and that was before we became a low medium income country. So when we were a low income country, we were 10th most unequal low income country in the world. In the world, okay? I'll let that sink in for a little. And then some regions in Kenya have human development indicators of high income countries like Seychelles, while others have human development indicators of countries at war-torn war-torn countries like Afghanistan. And so it is important for us by all means to address those inequalities. And I think, of course, we have made strides since the 2010 Constitution. And a lot of people can argue that, yes, there are strides that have been made. Are we there yet? Not really, with the kind of challenges that we see. Now, sometimes we feel comforted that, oh, you know, and we like these numbers a lot, right? So for example, when you look at, this is Coast. And if you look at Coast, for example, a place like Kisauni, you can see average poverty numbers are at 45. And we can then begin to say, oh, we are doing extremely well, you know. But there is a lot of intra-inequalities within different regions. So if you just look at all the maps of Kenya, and I have these maps, although this was before the new constitution, we have such ridiculous inequalities within different localities. So this is Kisauni disaggregated, and you can see, for example, Mwakirunge has poverty levels of 80%, while places, in this place, we are saying 45% of the people are poor, only 45. We have others that have 80% poverty and others that are like 37 and below. What am I trying to say? That it is not enough to speak in blocks, right? It is important to disaggregate data so that you can see the true picture of how people are disadvantaged within a locality. And if you followed the devolution conversations, part of the biggest problems, so we moved from issues of, ethnicity at the national level, but at the county level, the issues of clanism are tearing us apart because of this issue. Where, for example, if you look at any locality, if then the leadership, let's say, comes from Shanzu, it means that most of the resources are going here, and these people continue to be marginalized. And the point to make is that for any devolution conversations, we must think about how to do equity at the up to the ward levels. Let's look at inequalities in access to services. In the report, the inequality report I was telling you, the worst place to be born in Kenya is called Loima in Turkana. And just a disaggregation of that county says, if you are born in that locality, you are likely to be 2 times poorer than an average Kenyan, 15 times less likely than an average Kenyan to get a job, 13 times less likely to earn more than 7,200. Ridiculous, very ridiculous statistics, like 63 times less likely to have access to sanitary facilities than an average Kenyan. 3 times less likely to access clean water, 336 times less likely to have a stone-walled house and so forth. So you can see the type of inequalities we are talking about. Obviously, this was just, again, one of those illustrations in the conversations that, again, what was driving, let's say, this extremism is this issue about constant rejection by officialdom, and of course having ready access in informal spaces. And then socioeconomically, I don't know what your interpretation of this picture is. I love speaking in pictures because they say so many things that words cannot say. Who can try and interpret this picture for us? Anybody?
It's only a matter of time before the two that are enjoying a party up there come down.
Yes. So you've heard of the statistics, even globally, that only 1% is enjoying about 90-something% of the country's wealth. And so the rest of you are struggling, or not of you, of us, are struggling, So there are those who are completely, trodden down by life. There are those who are really trying, but you can see you can only get so much. There are those who are enjoying all the resources, and they protect those resources, the economic class or the political class. They do not want you to get in, right? So they, with the few resources, they will try and, when you get closer, they try and ostracize you. So the point we are making is that this is not also sustainable. You can see when the majority are down here, you're not going to be enjoying those resources for a while, right? There are those young people trying to look for innovative ways of trying to get up here as well. So anyway, those social classes are quite real in this country. And you can see just, again, you can see the amounts of money. The first quintile are people earning 1,400 and below, but the fifth quintile are earning like above 7,200 and above. And we all know, even for a student, 7,200 is not so much. So the monthly household consumption share in Kenya, in the fifth quintile is 3.6 times that of the first quintile. And in urban areas, those differences are like 121 times. In Nairobi, it's 690 times. So in Nairobi, someone in this fifth quintile is spending that 690 times much more than the person in the first quintile. So you can see those stark differences are quite high. And you can see Mombasa 75, Kiambu 22 times. All we are saying is that the income inequalities in this country are ridiculous. And just because you're able to, we think because we are able to get access that, it can't be that bad. But I normally say it is so bad you wouldn't believe it, because there are 75, just because you went to college, there are 75% who did not go to university or who don't have university education. So if you even manage to go to a technical college, you are among the 30% in this country that have that opportunity. And so it's important to be alive to those facts, okay? And then, of course, the gender inequalities are also quite high, and these ones have, I don't think I need to belabor the point, but for me, the numbers are staggering, okay? All male-headed households have more secondary education than their counterparts in female-headed households. What I mean is, if you go to Loima, all male-headed households, the ones that have secondary education, all households that are headed by male have secondary education, but their counterparts do not. I don't know whether that makes sense, right? And where there is secondary education, most of them, all of them are, there's a household head is a male, compared to those that don't have, where there is a female household head. But then the share of people with secondary education in Embakasi, which was like the average, was 79 times more than that of Loima constituency. So if you're from a female-headed household in Loima, so already the inequalities are 79 times. But if you're from a female-headed household, it is 120 times less likely for you to get a secondary education. And so those gender disparities are quite real in that sense. Let's look at gender and age. This is just election numbers, particularly because the people in this room, at least the interns, are interested in going into political leadership. Now, I want you to look at elections since 1963. This is total number of elected MPs. And then look at the number of elected women, okay? Elected women. The share is only 3.1 up to 2012. And then the number of women nominated was 1.4, okay? And then the total number of course, women elected and nominated then the proportion becomes 4.5, okay? Compared to the men. This is since independence. But let us look at what an affirmative action constitution did. And by that, I mean the constitution, by introducing devolution, by allowing more elective positions, and by also, of course, introducing those positions, there was much more inclusion of both women and young people. Because when you look at, this is male total positions in the 2013 elections, and this is the male youth. The numbers are here. And when you look at the female in total positions, that number increased, the female youth increased by 47%. So basically what we are saying is no young women were ever elected or nominated out of the dismal 4.5% before 2012. But this kind of policies where you're talking about affirmative action policies and programs allowed for more inclusion, both for young people, but also for women, okay? And so I'll be talking later about the power of policy, policy does help bring inclusion in place, but also some of this affirmative action. And I know there's a lot of misunderstanding about affirmative action. Now, there's also ethnic, and I know this is a very touchy subject, but I believe in discussing the numbers. If you look at ethnic exclusion, what do you see? And what do these numbers tell you? Anybody? So what I have done is I've put the total population, the percentage population or the proportion of the population based on the census. Then we're looking at percentage population in national government posts, the difference, and the range. The range is basically whether it's over or underrepresented. So what are you seeing? I just picked a sample.
Dr.
Yes.
This which year?
In terms of...
Sorry?
Which year is this?
2019.
Oh, okay.
Maybe to comment on the population, the percentage of population in the national government.
Yeah.
We have around 5 major ethnic groups that are above 10%, and then we have the rest below 5%. And the ones that are above 10% are the Kalenjin, Kikuyu, Luo, Luya. And we have Kisii also a bit higher, but then the rest are below 5%. Or and Kamba too, which is at 9.3.
Yeah. Okay. Sawa.
Personally, I would say for government positions, Kalenjin and Kikuyu share most of the have access to job opportunities. Yes.
Okay.
Dr. just to maybe ask, when we talk about government position, are we talking about appointive, employment, or all of them?
Kila kitu, appointed and employed in government.
Yeah, because I feel like I start feeling like sometimes that when we start, I don't know if it may help to start disaggregating them, because I feel like some of the statistics starts changing as you move across the various sectors due to certain various historical nuances, give or take. For instance, if you talk about, let's say, education, or talk about national schools, you may find that there's a particular ethnic community dominating national schools as employment. But then national schools, all of them are concentrated around Nairobi. So then you say, when you start picking up some of those dynamics, I feel like I like this data, but I also feel like there's a lot that can go in to bring out the various nuances. For instance, if we went to the military, would we say the Somali are underrepresented? You see that dynamic again will shift in a different sense. Like I know if you go to the police, I think the first Mijikenda to join the police force for the longest time was actually during this first recruitment. Yet funny enough, when the Mzungu came, the first police, the Kenya African Rifles, were from coast. So whatever happened in between, I'm thinking, I don't know how that helps this conversation, but just a thought.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think the point I was trying to drive here is, and for me, I believe in having the comfortable and the uncomfortable conversations. And usually when we present this data, people become very defensive and very sensitive. But the point to make is that you can see historical issues around these positions that based, first of all, just on the presidency, you can already see the people in government, being in government influenced the tribes that entered government, okay? Based on who the leaders were, okay? I agree with you, for example, maybe when Mulinge was in the security sector, most cows became part of the security sectors. And the point I'm trying to make is that in Kenya, employment opportunities are actually dependent on what? Largely dependent on ethnic affiliations. And that creates inequality. Because what we are saying in equity is that if your total population is about 13%, is it possible to have that proportional representation, or can that become a factor when employing people within a ministry, for example, so that other people who have who are underrepresented, for example, Mijikenda, Turkana, and others can also get an opportunity. You understand what I mean? So the conversation here is to introduce those uncomfortable nuances to say, how can we transition as a country so that we are able to try, all of us feel like we belong to, and we also can have access to some of these opportunities. Let me move on to, and we can discuss that at plenary. But I've been very fortunate, based on the work that I do, to try and interact with data quite a lot. And I just finished a book chapter that is still being published. And the chapter is called Targeting in Targeted Funds. And I was trying to look at, when we then try and address these inequality issues, what are some of the things government is doing? Because government is trying to then acknowledge that, yes, there's inequality. Yes, we need to address it, but are they doing it effectively? Of course, through the Constitution, there's quite a lot of policy provisions for that. Of course, with the, let me call them affirmative action funds, whether it's the youth fund, women's enterprise fund, equality fund that is going to the counties and so forth, there is that, effort to try and address those issues. The question then becomes, are they effective solutions to the challenge of inequality? And so what we did is that when you try and look at affirmative action in general, and when you look at the government's acknowledgement of inequality, there are basically 4 main sort of like domains of how they address this issue. Of course, leaving policy aside, they will, particularly on the issues of, let's say, youth unemployment, they will employ these employment issues. There's the issue of through education, there's the issue through financing, and that's why we have a plethora of, funds, disability fund, women's fund, and all of them now I'm told are going to be merged into a Biashara fund. And the entrepreneurship fund, whether it's the women's fund, the youth enterprise fund, and so forth. So these are the 4 main domains, and they have actually found that their target population is basically youth, women, and people with disability as the main target audience for these initiatives. So in this analysis that I did, I chose the Women's Enterprise Fund. And the reason I did that is because, of course, you need quite good data to be able to do this kind of analysis. And so the Women Enterprise Fund had the highest or the best data, publicly available data to use. Now, I looked at the objective of the fund, the estimated number of beneficiaries over time, and then I applied what we call categorical targeting. And in inequality or in these kinds of discussion, what we say is that one way of addressing inequality is to acknowledge that one person may have multiple inequalities. I don't know if there's anyone in this call who's, for example, from Turkana. So if you are let's say a young person from, let's say, a place like Turkana, you have a disability, and of course, that then gives you what we call multiple deprivation. So you cannot be treated, you cannot be treated the same as, let's say, a young woman from Nairobi, because your deprivation may be one, the fact that you are young. But someone from Turkana may have several barriers to try and ascend. So you do targeting, the categorical targeting, so that you are on point regarding, you're acknowledging everybody's levels of vulnerability. If you remember our picture of the short guy versus the tall guy, this one needs 2 boxes, the other one doesn't need any box. And then, of course, there's the loan disbursements and the ideal amounts of that should be disbursed. Now, when we did the analysis, very, very, very interesting data came. So this is the example of what the table showed. It shows we looked at the population, we looked at the proportion of the population, the actual beneficiaries, the numbers that were given money up to 2020. But based on the objective of the fund, the ideal number of people that should have benefited up to 2020 and the difference. So like, for example, in Nyeri, the current disbursements have basically performed at, let's say the performance is at 47%. In Nairobi, it's at 10%. Then you look at, okay, if they were to target, ideally, these 46,000 people should have benefited by now. 933 should be people with disability. Wilson, please mute for me that background noise. Then the ideal number of young people that should have benefited is about 13,000. And then these are the poverty levels in the county. And then these are the amounts that were disbursed. This is the proportion of if you calculate all the WEF resources up to now, the different counties and the proportion they receive. So Nyeri, for example, received 7.5% of all the women enterprise funds, compared to, let's say, Mandera that received 0.3% of all the WEF funds. Then ideal amounts for disbursements and the proportion of, or whether it's over or under disbursement. So that's the calculation. Now let's look at the results. I mean, you may not understand those numbers just by looking at the presentation, but let's look at what the results are telling us. That there's no, when you look at these funds that have been given to try and address inequality, and that inequality is manifesting itself in terms of age, in terms of region, in terms of, gender and so forth, you realize that the way they've been disbursing funds, and I can bet you it's not just the WEF, it's just that the analysis is on the Women Enterprise Fund, is that there's no correlation between the disbursements and the levels and the inequalities that need to be addressed, okay? Now, why do I say that? Because lack of targeting then means these funds are not going to effectively address the inequalities that they are created to address. Then you look at these WEF disbursements should have ideally reached by now 2.9 million women. But by 2020, they had only done 57% of that, okay? So there's need to try and target more people. But having said that, the data also shows the WEF disbursements are perpetrating the same inequalities they purport to eliminate. Let's see how they are doing that. Now, counties like Nyeri cumulatively, like I said, received 7.5% of the total Women Enterprise Fund resources. Turkana, which has the exact same population levels, but the poverty levels are like 84%, received only 0.5% of the WEF resources. The argument that is normally used, and I know that is burning in your hearts, is, oh, but there are absorption capacity issues. But what is the objective of the fund? To alleviate poverty and to bring women up. So you cannot bring in the issue of absorption, because what you're supposed to do is then make these people, Turkana, Mandera, Wajir, have the capacity to absorb the funds so that there's equitable distribution of resources. Okay? Now, let's look at just more analysis. 34 out of 47 counties under-benefited the targeted populations. So, like if let's say Nairobi, for example, actually there's an example here. Nairobi got 6% of the WEF resources, but only benefited 10% of the population that should have received the resources, okay? Which means in Nairobi, we are overfunding these women, okay? Now, 26 counties were underfunded. 17 counties were over-resourced, but they reached some less population. Again, the same argument with Nairobi. So Nyeri County is getting about 5 times more than the ideal resources that they should get, okay? But they benefited half the number of people that should have benefited. Few counties got the ideal amounts. So Tana River, Isiolo received the amounts like that they should have received by now. And they actually targeted double, or they benefited double the number of people that should have benefited. Kakamega and Nandi got the ideal resources they should have up to now, but they benefited only 11% of the beneficiary population. What is the point I'm trying to make? It's not just the WEF fund. If you look at this newspaper clip, the 1 billion of these resources of the Youth Enterprise Fund is being spent on parks. What are we saying? That in a sense, we are, yes, busybodies. That's what I would call it. We are giving the right diagnosis. We are even giving resources, but we go and completely convolute it and not achieve the results we want to achieve by not targeting these resources in a way that benefits the people who should. So how do we close the gap? As I finish, and I don't even know how much time I have taken. Definitely, for you to be able to know what you're doing, you need to disaggregate data. And the reason why data is a national security issue, or it is a political issue, is because when you have data, you are able to be transparent about how these things can be done. Secondly, and data is just a whole issue altogether in African countries, because it is what is used to conceal facts. Then, obviously, we all know we are not using our resources prudently. We get resources, we steal them. We get resources, we give our relatives and cronies, and we don't benefit the people who need to benefit. We are not targeting. Even when we are in the business of distributing targeted resources. This diagram for me is an interesting one, because again, our citizens have resigned to fate. And why for me, this program, Hesabika, is so interesting to me is it's trying to get young people from being passive and being conformist to being proactive citizens. And by that, you will notice that a lot of people want to be in this realm. And that's the majority of the people, passive, not doing anything. But we must, and the leadership, political leadership thrives on this cone looking like this. But people like Hesabika and others must try and turn the cone so that we have many more proactive people that can ask questions, follow with this kind of information, and make our leadership accountable to the resources that we have. Now, how else do we try and address these inequalities? Obviously, we need institutions. National and devolved institutions must eliminate wastage, ensure protection and inclusion of minority stakeholders. Infrastructure. They say that if you just build roads and railways in rural economies, you are likely to reduce poverty and create employment much faster than when you do it in larger cities. Okay, now the mega projects usually are in large towns, not in the very rural areas, to unlock some of that potential that is there. Information is critical. I'm sure today, I hope that the information I have presented is able to give you some basis to make intelligent arguments about why we need to urgently address inequality. And so information, whether it is through education, even a bad education system, if you read statistics about just accessing secondary education and what it does for generations, the health of children from one generation to another cannot be compared to when you have somebody who's dropped out at primary school. So education standards and information is critical. The labor market, provide opportunities for paid labor, especially young people. And the reason why African countries are doing so badly, we conceal a lot using data. I've just been doing an analysis of employment in Kenya. And the most devastating thing about this is that what is registered as employment is actually unpaid labor. That if you work in your father's farm in, let's say, Isinya, statistically you are employed, even if you're not earning money for it. So that conceals unemployment. And we are not able to see how unemployment is so high so that we try and do something about it. So providing, opportunities and paid opportunities for young people would help have money circulating within the economy, and that would boost livelihoods. Incentivize formalization. Kenya, when you look at the sectors, you realize that the informal economy is now in the 80%, right? And the informal economy is basically is the Juakali sector and so forth. But when we formalize some of these businesses that young people are starting, we actually are able to grow the productivity of these businesses between 19 and 34%. Okay, and formalize. So we are not incentivizing formalization. We actually penalize formalization. The moment you register a company, KRA comes for you, hounding you for taxes, even if you're doing nil returns. And the point is, if we found a way of incentivizing small growing businesses, we can make them more productive, and then we can hound them for taxes. And lastly, the issue that was talked about earlier about the tech economy, the creative economy, a lot of these things are able to really unlock a lot of potential. I did talk about agriculture a low-hanging fruit, one that can be able to help us in this country unlock, poverty, particularly if we sorted out the value chain and we sorted out export markets, we would be able to really unlock an employment because it is very labor intensive, automate agriculture. But what are we doing? We are privatizing agriculture so that only the big, big players benefit from it. And that those small players then completely keep remaining in the informalized, setup of agriculture. And so with that, I hope I have provoked quite a bit of a discussion. And I thank you so much, guys, for listening to me.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's give a hand to Daktari. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. One of the fears of non-economists is usually being overwhelmed with the statistics and formula and all that, but you have really brought it down to the level of ordinary people like me and others. And so we want to spend the remaining time, part of it, you just have an open forum question and answer. I would like to beg for from the audience a few more minutes after 12 so that we can tie up properly. There are some things that are just so good that you don't want to let go. So, but for now, I would like us to just have an open forum question and answer. We can also engage on the chat platform. But I would like to see the first couple of hands, and we'll just be asking you to unmute and raise your question. So who wants to go first? This is now a Q&A forum for issues that we need to engage further. Okay. All right. So I want to go to see the first hand. You can raise your hand and I'll see it. I see Vincent. And I'll pick a few others. Let's start with Vincent and we'll pick a few others as we move along.
Dr. Katindi, maybe, thank you so much. That was a very amazing and interactive presentation. Because you're talking to people who are likely to join government, would you talk about, in your experience working for IED, there's always this suspicion of non-government organizations, NGOs by mainstream government. And as you speak to people who are likely to join government, maybe you can talk about how can they form a healthy relationship, because I hold the view that I'm not an intern, important to note. I hold the view that sometimes I like the fact that NGOs normally fill the gaps where government is lagging behind. And sometimes there's this view as if people in government sometimes treat NGOs with suspicion and all that, yet they're actually occupying spaces that government is still unable to reach, whether it's because of bias, resource, or otherwise. How would you advise these young people to be on the lookout for constructive partnerships and of course, be careful of other external political nuances for NGOs? So how would you advise them in that particular space? Because I feel the issues you're raising are issues government should be doing. And because they have this thing where we have people outside the government who seem to have better solutions and better knowledge than those sitting in. So if the people here were all to go into government, what would you tell them about identifying and relating with critical and productive non-government actors?
Thank you, Vincent. And Dr. you can also maybe take another one from David. Engineer David Ngua is one of the mentors for our interns. You can come up, David.
Thank you, Wilson, and thank you, Dr. Katindi, for such insights and delving into numbers. They're still flashing in my mind. I think looking at the back to the front and looking at how big the problem is, and from where I sit, of course, looking backwards and futures, how do we what is the shortest route? And sorry for asking this. Sorry, I come from the world of science. So treating root cause. What is the fastest route to curing this? There's policy formulation, there's laws, and now we look like we need to do policies about policies. What is the shortest route to getting to this equality bill? Thank you.
Sorry, you're on mute.
Okay. Sorry, can I get another one so that I just answer like 3 of them?
All right, what I can do, let me ask from the chat. Iri Morenji is also one of the mentors. He's asking, is there a connection, is there a disconnect on accountability, such as through Auditor General's reports and implementation and review of government policy? Is this the ripe area for citizen-led oversight initiatives? So she's asking about accountability and how we can have citizen-led initiatives, oversight initiatives in terms of implementation.
Okay.
Yeah, you can take that, and then I'll get the other hands as we move along. Yes.
Okay, Hawa. So I think my answers are, by the way, not very, up there. They are very simple solutions. Number one, so Vincent is asking about this suspicion that government has with civil society, and the narrative that has been created around evil society. One of the things I know is that society in itself is very complex. And as a futurist, there's something we say, that we look at things as being interconnected and as a system. And so you cannot say that as government, you have the monopoly of ideas and solutions. And that if you don't acknowledge that for you to be able to be successful as a government, you need, first of all, to see the holistic picture of what the problem or the system looks like, and then try and understand what is the role of you as a government in creating an enabling environment for all the players to play their part effectively, so that you're able to collaboratively bring the solution. Then there's a problem. Why do I say this? Because in Africa, and it's not just in Kenya, when you criticize or critique, let me say critique government, you're actually arrested for it. But your critique may be the solution that is needed for you to be able to bring the solutions. So what I'm saying is that for you guys who want to go into politics or into government, first of all, there has to be a mindset shift that solutions cannot be given in barriers or in silos. We are in a society. And so that idea of looking at the issues as a system, that idea of understanding that they are partners, and the collaboration part of it, and that the only way to resolve these issues is if we work effectively in partnership with each other. That's the only way, in my view, I see as a solution. Now, the other thing is that the way, and the reason why I say the mindset is important is because we also, even our own system, it's a relearning process. And just on the side, I'm actually I have training programs that help us look at what does it mean to have a mindset shift. Our own system, education system, teaches us to think in silos. I like what I think David has said, I'm a scientist. And I will say I'm a futurist. And on the basis of that, it becomes a way to look, the siloed way to look at information, to look at solutions. And yet, the reason why we work collaboratively together is so that we can bring all those, all that expertise, because all of them are valid, for us to be able to work together and bring the solutions from different perspectives. And so that systems approach is very important. I think, David, when you talk about the shortest route, there is no quick fix in this matter, because as you have seen, it is a deeply rooted historical issue. And unless we are honest about discussing those, kung'oa mizizi, addressing those issues from the root, it becomes a problem. So let me just give an example of, if you say you're going, just look at the issue of BBI, for example. We understand that the issue of land inequality is such a big deal. But we are saying that this is the framework that is going to move us forward, or to improve the constitution, if it will. That's a debate for another day. But we conveniently leave issues we know that keep holding us back. Electoral justice, land issues, historical injustices. And as long as we are not honest about those deeply rooted, things that hold us back, we will never move forward. Wairimo is asking, the disconnect, the Auditor General's report, one of the things, having worked in this policy space for a while now, I see is that, again, we don't have the honesty to address these issues. And Kenya is so good in putting together, it's like saying, we put together the things that need to be done. You need a new constitution, I'll give you. You need Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, I'll give you. You need Gender Commission, I'll give you. So we seem to have the right, diagnosis, and we throw these institutions at people. The problem is we have no intention of making those institutions work. So we bring the constitution, but we undermine it. By what? By not funding, by ensuring we undermine independent institutions. And so because of that lack of honesty, to then put these institutions and follow through so that we can address the problems, we won't get anywhere. So you find the Auditor General's report, by the way, this is where we get the information I'm showing you, okay? So government has all this data, understands the issue, but has no intention to address it. And that for me is where the problem is. So it's like having a rotten egg in your bag. You keep complaining it is smelling, but you never remove it from your bag and clean your bag.
Thank you so much, Daktari, and perhaps you need a few more chicken to lay more eggs. so you need to know how to raise those chicken. Patrick Mwangi has raised his hand, so you can shoot your question quickly. We can take one more round before we bring this forum to a close. Patrick Mwangi, and I can also have other questions as well on the platform. I'll take note of that. Patrick?
Thank you, Wilson, and thanks a lot, Daktari, for the info you've provided. It's absolutely amazing to see the figures and the statistics, and at the same time, it's also very, very depressing. I knew there were issues with this country, but not that deeply. My question is, I may not be a person in NGO, I may not be in government, I may not be in civil society. I am your ordinary Kenyan going about their business. How do I bring about this change? Because it concerns me, it concerns my family and the people I know and generations to come. So how can I effect change just where I am? That's my question. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other hand? Before I ask one of my own. Right, and we can keep typing our questions. This actually might be your last chance to ask a question because of our time. I see two more hands. So what I'll do, I'll ask you oh, right, okay. I think the other one was for David, which we have already dealt with. The question I want to ask, and I'm asking on behalf of many of us, is you did mention the issue of the trickle-down economics, and I think even moving it to our context, the investment, the heavy investment in projects that are going to have a long-term kind of the dividends will be reaped many years after this. What would be your advice on that in terms of prioritizing the low-hanging fruit more or less, so that especially those who are excluded, there can be things that are quicker gain, even as we think about. So it's a question of balance. How do we do that? But secondly, you did mention the issue of debt, and it's not just a problem for the country. Of course, we have experts that we are learning from. That's why Fuliza is the way it is going. I want to ask, in terms of lifestyle change, especially because many of us may not be players in the field, we might still continue standing on those boxes. But how does the state of the economy inform how we rethink lifestyle at the ordinary mwananchi, and in a way that deals with debt, because you did mention that there seems to be a serious problem, so that when maybe you can help us appreciate that, because at the end of the day, we need to reevaluate how to restructure, those lifestyle choices at family level and so on that we need. And lastly is Kahodo, and then we'll pick that. Kahodo, you can come on with your question.
Yes, good afternoon, Dr.
Good afternoon.
My question was about the labor market and the 24-hour economy. What policies can be put in place to ensure that the market absorbs more human capital, or more people?
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You can take it away from there.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. So Patrick, this issue about ordinary people, I think is in my view, an interesting question, because like if you look at the continuum of change, it has to start from the person up to all the way to the institutional or national level, right? And at a personal level, I think there are personal decisions that people need to make. And the more different individuals make, let's say, the right decisions, you then get what we call a critical mass to do the right thing, right? So at an individual level, it's important that we do the right thing. And so for me, somebody actually wrote on the chart, pay your house help fairly, right? And so to what extent in our personal lives do we do the right thing, whether it's enhancing justice, whether it's making the right decisions for ourselves and our loved ones. So I normally joke, for example, and say, if I was in a position of, let's say, influential political power, to what extent would my relatives be putting pressure on me to steal, right? So that if I leave that office and I don't have all these things that seem to be defined that society uses to define success, like a big car, houses, land, and all that, they'll be the very first people to tell me that huyu ni mjinga. When they were working in government, they didn't accumulate things for themselves. So in essence, as a society, we pressure people to do the wrong thing, but then we complain that there is, for example, government is stealing or government officials are stealing. So the point is, we and our loved ones, do we have the right, because it's easier to judge other people and not ourselves. Are we living the right way and making the right decisions? But more importantly, I think there's a place for prayer, because I think some of these strongholds, I think, cannot be dealt with any other way. And I think there's a place for us to pray individually, but also make the right decisions. But I also think that we need to influence others in making that right decision. So in my place as a futurist, or in Sabika, for example, by doing these forums, at least today we have about how many people, 50 people on the call that have had the message and hope will be transformed. And so if we are influencing people in our circles to do so, let's hope that we'll get a critical mass that will one day be able to make the right decision. But the other thing about that, it's easy to make decisions at a private level, the right decisions. So many times I realize that a lot of these things, as the more you go, for example, if the more, let's say, we talk about these things at the public level, to what extent are we willing to pay the price? Because what tends to happen is that, let's say I'm in an office, a public office, and there's something that needs to be whistleblowed. You have seen how once you are a whistleblower, how much people will just take your life out. But to what extent are we willing to do the right thing unto death when we have to pay the price? And I think that's where the trick comes in, because I've seen a lot of Christians, for example, stand back and say, but why did you speak out against the injustice? But how will injustice go away if you don't speak out? Sometimes acknowledging that there will be a price to pay. Are we willing to pay that price to do the right thing? And for me, that's where the disconnect comes in, that you may do the right thing at a personal level, but when it comes to pay the price, we are not ready to do that. The second question was about this issue around trickle-down economics, prioritizing the low-hanging fruits. I think for me, Wilson, there are many low-hanging fruits in this country, so many. Number one, can you imagine if we stopped stealing 2 billion shillings every day? How far would that money go in helping this country resolve the kinds of issues that we are seeing? So a lot of these things don't even need a conference. They just need us to do what is right before us. This thing about some of these things are systemic. In my dissertation, which I'm hoping that I'll get clearance to publish, I make an argument about youth unemployment. And I talk about this fallacy, in my view, of giving enterprise funds and other things. And I have a solid argument for it. My argument is 80% of businesses fail, these youth enterprise businesses, they fail before their second birthday. 80+% fail before their second. So it means all that money that you have put in, 80% of it is going down the drain. Number two, when we train them for 8 weeks, you're training these young people to be entrepreneurs in 8 weeks. We are developing what we are calling household enterprises, which is really like those very small, it's like buying and selling that is not a viable business. And I'm going, because we've been sold to this idea that entrepreneurship is the way to go. I'm not refusing it. It is one of the ways to try and resolve youth unemployment. But my view is that we are not addressing the systemic issues that have led to youth unemployment in the first place. So when in countries that have dealt with youth bulges before, their education and their health system are the number one investments where you make to get 100% of your youth access those services. Why? Because a healthy young person who is well educated, you don't need to give them money to go and start a business. They will be well educated enough. They will get opportunities for themselves within the economy. They will go start those businesses. So the systemic issue of education and health is so critical that it cannot be substituted later in life with a few shillings for this person to go, a 4-week training for this person to go and start a small business that has 80% chances of failing. My point is very simple, that we need to invest in the systemic issues that are going to result to the changes, the kind of changes we need to see. And that, yes, if we are going to give youth enterprise funds, is that we have such a good quality level of youth that is coming to access that they are going to be able to actually then create viable businesses that are going to continue and not fail at the rate at which these ones are failing. I'll leave that at that because I know there are quite a lot of arguments going on in your minds, but we can pick it up later. And so the point I'm trying to address here, Wilson, is to what extent are we, you see, like when you do an analysis of devolution, one of the things you realize is that the reason why a county will prioritize a building more than a service is because it is much easier to steal from a building than when you're honestly trying to provide a service. And so the point for me is the low-hanging fruit is just be honest and do what will be able to give you the maximum amount of return and fundamentally deal with the problem. Now, when it comes to the issue of debt, I think one of the things, and in that book I'm talking about, or the dissertation, I deal with the issue of what is the mindset of, for example, the millennials or the Generation Z, and how they view money. They are growing up in a culture of consumerism and this instant gratification. And we have not unpacked what that does to their mental frame and their outlook for money, for success, for power. And so when they want to live beyond their means, we are not questioning where is the root problem for this thing. And are we doing a counterculture, or are we infusing different values that enable them to slow down on, delayed gratification or living within your means or working for some of these luxuries, okay? And that it's a much bigger problem than Fuliza. It is this culture that has been instigated, whether it's through adverts or whatever, to this culture of this, that's the reason why they're making these lifestyle choices. And we have to start from very far to educate ourselves and others on how to reverse those cultures. When it comes to this issue, of course, at the national level, there's much more need for vigilance. To what extent people have time to do that or even want to engage is a different matter altogether. When it comes to the labor market and the 24-hour economy, Kahudu, I'm totally for, expanding the labor market, trying to look at the sectors that are growing the economy and understanding that we need to have very labor-intensive sectors for us to be able to absorb the kind of youth that we are channeling out into the labor market. We need, like I said, to have dealt with this issue in the 90s when we have the child, when we had the child bust, so to speak. And we need to have seen this coming so that we should have started much earlier. But now that we are here where we are, I think we need to definitely think about this labor intensive. The only problem in this country is that our politicians are also your economic barons. And so what they do is they create policies to advance their own private businesses. And that then leaves very little room for you to create labor-intensive markets that will benefit young people. Because policy choices half the time are benefiting the businesses that they own. And so we need a leadership that is very honest about benefiting everybody and trying to understand that this labor-intensive, the tech economy, the gig economy, this 24-hour economy are some of the, things that need to be done to leverage youth employment in the country. So thanks, Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the bench, as someone says, is just warming up. Yeah, so we may not be able to take many more questions. We may not be able to take more questions now in the interest of time, but perhaps as a way of signing out, maybe Dr. we can allow maybe a maximum of 2 people to say what takeaways they have. We don't have time for breakouts. It would have been lovely to do that, but we can do that another time. Maybe you can allow the first 2 hands at most, or 3. What is your takeaway from today? And then Margaret will come and do the announcements and get us out of here. So I see David. David, you can just raise it. And I know Vincent had raised a hand. I don't know whether it was for a question or a final remark. So David, you can come on for now. Yes.
Thanks, Wilson. I think my main takeaway is that number 10 for Kenya, highest inequality on low and low income countries. The other point is on disaggregation of data. I think that map of Mombasa and further for Kisauni. I think looking at the greens within the greens, the greens within the browns, that inequality is not spread as we have talked about it in the country with the mention of the equalization funds and so on. And I think the biggest one, and I think that requires maybe for us, even though I'm in the energy sector, is the route that China took out of poverty alleviation, and that is agriculture. I think there's something that Tari mentioned. I think for me, I would want to take that and study it more deeply, because I think for us as a country, it might be one of the things we've not looked at. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. We have Francis, and we need to hear at least one lady at the very least. But Francis, and I would encourage an intern to just summarize on our behalf what we think we have learned before we close. So Francis, and then one more person, and then we'll be done.
Thank you, Dr. The major thing that I'm taking home is actually from what you have shared in your final comments, where there's a great need to actually look into the health and education sector. And that will do more and greater than giving someone money and they do not know how to actually use it. For instance, like the youth fund given, and after 2 years, the business has already died. So that's a major take home for me.
Okay.
Thank you, Francis. One last person, a sister. Who is the sister in the house who wants to? I know we have many things, but perhaps you can say it on behalf of the rest of us.
I can speak.
Yeah, Jacinta,
thank you very much.
Yes,
June. June. Hi, Katindi.
Hi.
Oh, okay.
We only fun.
All right, Jacinta will allow her as well. Yeah.
Oh, so then let Jacinta go then.
No, you can do that, and then Jacinta will be the very last person.
I think I was just smiling. I was just smiling over what she's just said. I'm taking a course on human economic flourishing, and I think yesterday was a really sad day for us. It was our last day of meeting, and we're grappling with, so what? We have all the statistics, we have all the the info, we've read, we know how the global economic system is and how it affects us at the local level. And some of the effects also are, in-house from what we have. And I think that's what Katindi has done a very good job of showing us the bits we are contributing to the where we are economically and socially also and politically. I think what I'm trying to say is that I have a very good takeaway from this sitting in one of the ways that we can move forward. And I think one of the things we grappled with actually was inequality, because it's one of the biggest hindrances to human flourishing, economically speaking. So I think, I
think we lost
Did we lose June, or it was me? Okay. June, are you there? Okay.
Mr. Kuna.
Yeah, there was one person, Kahodo, I think will probably let you type your comment. There was one lady, and then after that, Maggie will just come and make some announcements. But you can type your takeaway as well. Yeah. Jacinta, are you there?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. I think I want to appreciate Daktari for all this information and the statistics. Actually, they are very, depressing when you think about it, and especially about the inequality. But I also want to say that the takeaway is, I think we should be willing to pay the cost. We don't need to keep quiet. I think we need to talk. That is my take home. We need to talk. Even from the, we don't need to keep it in our hearts. I think this is what is bringing depression and the manifestations that we are seeing all over, the suicides, the murders, and all these kind of things that are happening. I think we need to speak out and not keep quiet. Even if you're going to suffer, whatever the consequences, I think we need to talk. Whenever inequality is practiced, I don't think we need to keep quiet. And that is what I've been doing in a small way, but I believe change starts with us. We need to talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacinta, and for each and every one of you. I know we would have loved a little more time, but that's all we had for today. I want to thank Dr. Katindi for her wonderful presentation.